And I totally forgot. So how does that sort of make sense for what you've done already? And really important, this audit trail, because then if you go to publish it, this is what builds your Prisma, which is another part of the sort of part you need. And then I always find it easier to download so once you've got your sort of like you've searched and you've found maybe 300 articles which meet your inclusion criteria in the searching through title and abstract. So never search in the databases just on all of the article. Always search title and abstract, because otherwise you're just going to get far too many. If it's not in their abstract or their title, you don't want to see it because it's not going to be a major part. So then once you've got then your, it may be 300, 500, it may only be 40, depending on the different topics. Like Caitlin's topic, it may be quite a small number. That's when then you go and you do the title, abstract, and a full review. And in that's then when you identify, no, the population isn't my population, or it's got too many. So your dietitian one, you may have an article that's a really great article, but then it's dietitians, exercise physiologists, physios working in mental health. But if they haven't separated the data, you've got to just let it go and use that as recommendations or background, because you can't actually then say this is dietitian's role, because you really can't tell what voice is what. And so it really, I always find it's good to sort of just keep looking back at that inclusion criteria at this when you're going through. So you can sort of be, you need to sort of be quite strict on yourself, because it's, I know I've had other students, but this is such a good article. Yeah, it is, but doesn't meet your inclusion criteria, which means then it doesn't allow you to have a rigorous and a systematic scoping, literature review. So that's always something you can think about. And then the next stage, once you've got so you've got down now to 10, 15, you might only have 5 or 6 if you've got a really specific topic. That's when you really start to pull out the data, so the data extraction phase of your literature review. I again use the same Excel sheet. So I've got my searches on the first tab, then my next tab, I have my articles. So I literally copy, drop them, and then start to pull the data. So you want, what country was it in? What title? What was their aim? What was their method? Sample size. Um, Also things like, what were their measures? So if it's a quantitative, what surveys did they use? If it's an infection control, what tests did they do? So you want this all in your columns, so that when you go to look at these articles, you can compare the same data. Because otherwise, if you've sort of, and sometimes you have to really search through the article to find what you want, because you've got to find it in that article. They may have presented it slightly differently. So, if you're looking at sample and mean age of that sample, you might have to actually work that out yourself. They may have given you a range, but then you can go, okay, well, if you had 10 participants, their ages from this to this, then the mean is likely to be there. So you can actually work that out yourself. And what you've got to decide as in this data extraction is, what is important data for you to talk about, to summarize and critique these articles, because that's where you might build other sort of columns where you actually say, I want to, particularly if you're sort of Caitlin's and Yana's, I want to know what, what the lab results are, or something quite specific. In yours, with about the dietitians, you may have one that looks at different, and you actually pull the different roles from all the different articles. And so then you could, and the reason of doing this in this big Excel sheet is that then you can start to sort of see what you need to talk about, because a literature review is not just a summary, it's an analysis and a critique of these included articles. So that's where you go, well, these people looked at this, but they didn't include this aspect. And so then you sort of go, well, if I'm going to build my change practice on that, I have to be aware that that's not going to be generalizable or something. So this is your aspect to sort of really look at it critically. And that's worth marks in the assignment, but it also helps it get published as well. The other thing you need to look at, and this is in the course site, is doing a scoring of the actual articles research attributes. So it's called the mixed method assessment tools, MAT tools. They're fairly simple, and so literally you use on the one that we've got, you just go and the first questions it asks, does it have a research question? Is the sample answering that research question? Because we know in research that if they don't actually have a research question, is it valid research, or have they just presented a summary? So that's where that's where your critique. So you're looking, you have to sometimes go through different parts of the article to actually find it. The next thing you want to look, if it's a qualitative article, have their sample, have they done interviews, observation, or something that aligns with that methodology? And if it's quantitative, have they got enough sample size? Have they done surveys? Are they validated? So all of these sort of individual sort of analysis of the articles means that you can then say, this is quality research, or this doesn't meet quality standards. And so, you know, this is where you'll see on when you look at published literature reviews, they'll have that analysis. And so the analysis will be that they might have done a summary of the included aspects of the manuscript, and they've done an analysis of the quality of the research, and then they might have done a thematic analysis on the overall results. So you've got sort of these three aspects that you are expected to do in a literature review. So the thematic analysis is, and some people call it a narrative analysis. So you're literally looking at their results and making sense of it. Now, you can do this several ways. As you're reading the articles, in your column, you might write some notes and put in, if they've got a qualitative article, you might put in some of the voice that really makes sense of sort of this aspect. Because most of you have actually got very quantitative styles of reviews, except for the transition and the dietitian role, what you're probably looking at is what key points have they found? Because then what you're wanting to do in a thematic analysis is match those points across the articles. So if everyone said that, you know, vaporized peroxide works well, that might, you know, that becomes then a strong aspect that you can then say all articles had this. If then you find that they sort of the quality of these articles was not very good, you could then add that into your critical analysis of the included articles. So the whole time you're looking at these articles that you've included, you're trying to think, does it make sense? Is it useful for others? How do I summarize and critique it? So that's probably about as much as, so that gets you the first main steps of a lit review. And I'll just see any questions rather than going on. Did it make sense, and is it what you expected you were doing?
Yes, thank you. I don't have any questions at this point. I'm sure I will in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and feel free, like as you notice I'm fairly quick to answer an email. So I do better on emails than in meetings because I don't know, my calendar seems to fill up so much. So, and I know you guys are all clinicians, so meetings sometimes hard, but yeah, I'm quite happy to answer an email if you sort of flick me a question. Arnica.
I have a question that might have been answered, but I couldn't attend the librarian session, so please throw me their way if this is not an appropriate forum to ask. Is more around like grey literature,
Yep.
and like do we just use the same kind of databases, the same kind of search terms? Because I guess like I'm almost in my mind, I'm working a bit backwards of like I actually have a fairly good understanding of the literature and the grey literature just from my job.
Yep.
But obviously I can't just like pick and pull what I already know. Like I need to be more systematic, like and
So,
do the whole process.
so excellent point. Now you can book time with the librarian. I love the
Mm,
librarians. They are amazing. So
mhm.
you can actually go onto the library site and just book them, and they will do a one-on-one session with you for half an hour. So
Yeah.
I would definitely suggest that for anyone, especially when you've got a topic that's a little bit different, but also with you because you're going to be doing what so when you're looking at integrative reviews, it normally doesn't include grey literature. So you're doing
Mm,
more what we call a scoping review, which it looks
okay.
at. Now, you can include in that hand-sourced grey literature.
Hmm.
So you might do your searches across the databases, including Google. So,
Hmm.
but you just got to think, you've got to use the same search terms, see
Yeah.
what comes up. But then you can also on your Prisma have this addition of hand searched material.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool. Because, like, I guess just as a really brief example, like our accrediting body, Dietitians Australia, has like a role statement for mental
Yeah.
health, but that's not like published literature. But I think it's like important to
Yeah, yeah,
recognize
yeah,
and
yeah.
consider.
No,
But yeah,
that's very similar in the cancer nurses. We've got
yeah.
sort of quite strict guidelines, um, and so. But what you want to do in that is anything that's a policy or a guideline, and so even in the other ones, which is about the sort of, will have references. So they cannot write a policy or a guideline without it being evidence based. Well, they
Mm,
shouldn't. So have a look at their references and go to that primary source.
mm,
That's where you may then, and that's where you can then actually in your critique say, these guidelines are totally outdated. I did a literature review with colleagues because my baseline is cancer nursing. We looked at the evidence around nurses' administration of chemotherapy and sort of best practice of protection and all that sort of stuff, and actually identified that the guidelines, which had not been changed for absolute years, had very little um, evidence behind them. And so we actually then developed a guideline with, and it actually, we put it across the Australians health and safety standards.
mm,
So it's things like that, that when you really start to look at sort of guidelines and policies, you often realize that they've been like updated by default, one might say, because it's sort of like someone made it originally with evidence, but then every time else it's just like, oh well, that still works, that still works. So have a think about when you're looking at your guidelines. Now Caitlin, yours you would probably have guidelines again, so you may find the same thing, that you will then use those as additional. So when you're on your Prisma, it says search by databases, and then you have another one that you add in hand searched or references.
Yeah, so I've used our hospital's policy. Is that okay? And
Yes.
also ACIPSI, which is like our professional
National body.
infection
Yep.
control body. I've used a lot of position statements from them. Is that okay?
Yeah, and so just have a look at their references, and
Yep.
just check whether they meet your criteria to be
Yeah, a lot of it
included.
from the CDC.
Yep.
So
Yeah. So, and that's what you often find, that it just doesn't. Yeah, it's evidence, but it's not good evidence, and it doesn't quite fit. Yep. And see, Yana, you may find the same with yours, that there'll be policy and guidelines which you can have as grey literature, or you may just decide to actually just use evidence. You can do that as well. You can say, no, I'm going to just do a straight integrated review, just looking at the published evidence from people that have done primary studies measuring bacterial contamination on that particular MSU.
So I got slightly lost along the way of this conversation. So in terms of doing an integrative review, if you're searching your 4 databases, if you're looking at, Australian infection control guidelines or whatever else, if they meet your criteria of inclusion, you can use those as the primary source, as in reviewing that, or you're just using it in terms of other
so
aspects
it's not a primary source. So primary research has to be done by someone.
Yes,
Secondary research is all the rest. So that's your lit reviews, your policies, your guidelines. It's all secondary research.
Okay.
And so you don't include lit reviews in a literature review, because that would be like using someone else's process of primary research, but you can include that in your background and your discussion. Like it can be built up. And so you may decide you'll just use primary research for your results, for your evidence, and then link that in the discussion to the guidelines and the policies. And Zianica, you may find that as well, that if you can find enough primary research where people have actually interviewed dietitians, done national surveys, that it does give you a stronger literature review if you've got the voice of the primary research, and then you link it and compare it to the policies in the discussion.
Once again, a kind of vague question off the top of my head and my knowledge of the literature that does exist, like in the Australian context. There's not that many though. Like if
so
I
does
could
it
find,
need to be Australian?
probably maybe not. Like I guess I could expand that out and have a look. That was just kind of my instinct, was to stay in Australia. But
I think one of the things that we tend to do in Australia is we stay inside our box, but sometimes, and I know, and I've got colleagues in Europe, and their dietitians there have work in a range of places, and that would be really good to have some of your evidence to actually say it's done elsewhere. We can look at it doing it here, because one of my colleagues is a dietitian in Denmark, and they have a lot of community practice, and they have a big role in supportive care on rehab.
okay. That's a good point. Like, that the roles are, I guess my initial hesitancy was like, that scopes of practice in other countries are a bit different, and like the other training is different, but in a way, I guess that can kind of strengthen. I'll just have to have a look.
And so to point that out, so it's always good in your background to add in any specific definitions. So we just we've just done a lit review about residential aged care and registered nurses working with non-English speaking background patients, clients. And because we put it in an international journal, we had to, like, we call residential aged cares, but everyone else calls them different. So it's really good in your background to even now be thinking, what definitions are needed to identify? So you might have one that was about, dietitians. Caitlin, you may have one that's really about this, what is a contaminated room, so that it's clear to other readers what you're talking about. And so this is, I think that's quite an interesting aspect. Then you start with, this is the big picture. There's dietitians and there's this need. This is what a dietitian does in Australia. This is internationally. And then let's look at the literature internationally. And then you bring that back in the discussion saying, well, our policies say this, our guidelines, and then this is what I found. Sort of, and that would go across basically anyone's, because see, Fallon, yours in the transition, like we know that there's educators internationally, their roles are slightly different, but often it's the way of doing things, and their reason is very much the same. And so we can learn a lot from the way other people have done it, to then sort of improve our practice in Australia. Any other questions?
Is there any limiter on the age of the articles?
You decide the limit.
Okay.
So, one might say and you've got to think, and this again goes back to that definition that you're putting in your background. So when has the process changed? So you could say 5 years, because 5 years ago there was a big, change in policy and this happened. Or you might say, I'm going to look 10 years because, there's been no major changes, that just is current. Or you might say, I'm actually going to look at, a no end, any literature, because this has not been changed. And I really want to see if it's changed through different times. Because remember, you're doing an analysis and a critique. And so you might find in your critique that you're saying that we used to do this and it's improved over time. However, these are still issues. Or you might say, if it was, just current, I'm only using 5 years because the latest policies said we need to be doing that. But this evidence shows that this is not happening or something. So that becomes your critique. And that is the beauty of a literature review, is that you are setting the research question and the boundaries to find the answer to your question. And you've got to keep going back to that question. I need to answer my question.
Sorry if these are silly questions. I've still
Nothing's ever a silly question.
understanding the practical applications. I look at the steps in the framework and I go, yes, that makes sense. And then I go to do it and I'm like, so when you're doing that first, so you're happy now with your search terms, you put the search term into the database. And so that result that you get from your finalized search terms, that whole lot is coming out into your first kind of, wherever you're putting it.
Yep.
EndNote, for example, and then the screening happens from there.
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So remember to search in title and abstract. So you have to put that into the advanced search drop down, because otherwise you do get like crazy things. And exclude. So you can also then add exclusions, not literature reviews. You only want primary research, not pediatrics, because I normally look at the first, in the database, I normally look at the first 10 or 20. And if I've got crazy articles, I go, yep, that did not work. If I've got like 1,000 things and I've got anything from pediatrics to, sort of adults. So that's how you then go, okay, no, I need to have adults. I need to have nursing. I need to have, and so then you end up with, and you've seen it when you look at a lit review, they'll have maybe like 5 to 10 actual words. Remembering to use the little asterisk, and this is why the meeting with the librarian is really good. So if you do NURS asterisk, I'm not sure what it'd be for dietitian. I reckon it would be DIET asterisk. Then you would get anything that's got dietitian, dietitians, dietetics, any aspect. So this is the thing. So, when you're looking at your infection control ones, once you find 1 or 2 good articles, look at their keywords and make sure you've then got those in your keywords, because if that's what keywords gives you a good article, then see what those keywords bring you. So this is why you often do the first couple of searches several times. But the beauty of a lit review is, by rights, you should be able to search on day 1 and day 5 and you literally get the same number of articles. So as long as you've got your audit trail in your Excel sheet or whatever you're using, then you can always just go back and you just copy and drop it into the database.
That spreadsheet, I know you and I talked about it, and I think you've referenced it in this meeting, actually. Did you say that template is up in the Canvas? What the place? the
Yeah,
module
no,
somewhere.
I don't know if I did, because the problem is, as researchers, everyone's a little bit different. I'm working with a student that's a nurse, but we're working in business, because she's looking at, and I had to actually look, I never even heard about it, crucible moments of leadership, because she is obviously a leader, a nurse leader, and so she's looking at what makes some nurses become good leaders and others struggle. Um, and we've got a business person, because his research is all about what makes a leader, because that's sort of that business marketing. But he uses a totally different template. He uses a Word doc and just has like a date and then the search terms and the numbers and the date. So he just does it that way. So everyone is different. So I've got, just looking at, so you've got the libraries bit there in the modules. I'm not sure if I did. I think I'd probably need to send it just to you.
That would be good, because when
Yeah.
you showed me, I thought, yes, that
Yeah.
makes sense. That
I
seems
thought I
really
had actually,
useful.
so I will
Yeah.
send to my group the the MAT scores, and how I've done that in the past, and the Excel temp chart. It's sort of just decide, like, I suppose I'm a lover of Excel, because it means that you can add in columns and you can just scroll along. And when you go to eventually generate your own table, you just sort of use what you actually need of the columns. You don't have to have every column, because by the time you've got to the end of all your data analysis, you've got a lot of columns. But what you got then is one place where you go to write your summary, which is part of your results. And you can see it all there. So you can sort of go, measurements were blah, blah, and blah. But then you might have them in another table. So in your lit review, you might have, especially for the scientific ones, you may have exactly bacteria found, numbers, I'm not sure sort of what you would put in, but like, see what those articles bring to you. In your transition one, Fallon, with the RNs, you may have a table which is about different ways that other people have done that transition, interventions, or whatever they're called, supportive measures for new graduates, so that you decide what is the best way to present this literature from 10 articles, so that someone else reading it doesn't need to read 10 articles. They read your piece of work and go, ah, that sounds like a great idea. I now have got an idea and I might do this. So yeah, I will send that out to you. Any other questions? And it is a process. And so the other thing that I would also suggest, it helps, you could sort of even now start to write your Word doc ready for your end assignment, and which end lit review, where you've got your background, your method, your results, your discussion, your recommendations. Because even as you're finding the articles, sometimes it's good to just write notes into that Word doc. So you might find an article and you think, that has got a great piece of for recommendations, and so you just jot it down, because then when you come to write this 5,000 word piece, you're not overwhelmed with going, oh my gosh, how do I start this? You've already got notes all the way through it, and you can write your method as soon as you've completed what you've done. You can write your background probably already as well, because this is why you're doing it. So it's sort of that, what is the problem, what's the current research, this is significant, this is why I'm looking at it and bringing this to a critical analysis. So that sometimes you get, sort of use your time. You might think, well, actually this week I'm just going to write this section because I'm overwhelmed with looking through all these articles. Or you might say, no, I'm just going to embed myself and do the analysis on these 10 articles and write as much as I can on them. the other thing is to do little summaries. Sometimes it's nice to do your own summary on the articles that you have included, because that again just means, one, it's practicing those, looking at research and putting it in your own words, but then those summaries often just become your results. You just smooth them out, so you've got sort of, this article said this and this one said that, and overall this means that. And you just, writing a literature review is literally a recipe. So you just pick up any of the published ones that we've got there that you like. Oh, I like the way this one set out, and that's, you just follow that. Because you'll notice that when you look at lit reviews, some have got lots of tables, others have got more written stuff, but you can just choose the way you want it. Okay, well, I might let you guys go home. Finish your
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you. This has been really helpful.
Good. And so yeah, so
Thank
just
you.
emails, and then I'll have another one. I'm actually going to Africa for 2 weeks in the middle of trimester. That's the problem with going to on holidays with family, because they've set this date like, 12 months ago, and I'm like, but that's not really a good time for me. But anyway, but luckily it actually fell in between the 2 assignments for my other course that I'm teaching, which is amazing.
Where are you going in Africa? That sounds amazing.
We're doing a safari in the Kruger National Park. So it's one of these bucket list things that we've all had. And so we've said, right, let's just do it. So yeah, it'll be a bit crazy. We're only got like 6 days. We leave next Tuesday. I can't actually believe I'm going to Africa to see giraffes and zebras in real life. But yeah, amazing. So yeah, so we'll come back probably a bit overwhelmed, because I think it's going to be one of those holidays where it's go, 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 and then we're going to get home and I'm going to need a holiday, but that's okay. And I've got
Have
a
the
whole
best
stack
time.
of, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've got a whole stack of marking for my other master's course, which I've got to get done before I go. So I'll have a very busy Easter in marking, but that's okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to seeing your bits of work. And you can even just, like, as you're sending stuff, just send the silliest question, doesn't matter. I'll just give you some heads up, because it's much better to ask lots of questions along the way rather than go a distance and then go, then me say, oh no, you've actually gone off track here. So yeah, lots of questions, keep sending them through, and I'll just keep answering them and sending you, so you stay focused throughout the whole 12 weeks, or 7 weeks left we've got now. Okay, thanks, bye.
Thank you.